All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are into our Chapter 1 of Introduction to Ethics. This is Russell Schaefer Landau, and we are going to be talking about hedonism today. So we've been doing, depending on the order in which your class is taking the chapters in the text, you did meta-ethics first. So we had 3 chapters of meta-ethics, and now we're moving into the section on value theory. And if you remember, there are 3 different parts to doing philosophy of ethics. 1 is meta-ethics, 2 is value theory, 3rd is normative ethics. So when we're talking about value theory, just to reset what that means, we're talking about not a theory about what's right or wrong, but about what is good or bad. Or if you look at it a different way, we're talking about actions and conduct. Value theory is not theory that gives us rules for what to do or what not to do, but explains what is worth doing. So that's the difference between value theory and normative theory. And so what we're going to do is start with our very first value theory, which is hedonism. And we're going to kick things off by pointing out what the theory of well-being is attempting to do in hedonism in particular. As I was just saying, what we're after is to figure out what is it for life to go well? What kinds of things, if we pursue them, will make our lives go well and be better? That's what we're after. And so what that means is they're after something that is good for its own sake, not for particular consequences that come from it. So in your text, he talks about things that are instrumentally good. So that means it's valuable if it's valuable because of other things that it brings about. For example, to take kind of a negative example, it's instrumentally good to go to the dentist and to get your cavity filled, but we wouldn't say that's intrinsically good. Because it involves discomfort, at least, if not a little bit of pain. It's disruptive. But we say it's instrumentally good because going through that brings about some other good that does matter more. Okay, so like healthy teeth. Okay? Or at least minimizing the pain. So instrumental goods, then, are valuable not in themselves for their own sake, but insofar as their effects are beneficial. All right, so what we're after when we're talking about, and just back up to the other slide here, what we're talking about in theories of well-being are not instrumental goods. We're looking for things that are intrinsically good, that is good for their own sake, because it's those sorts of things that instrumental goods point toward, or that instrumental goods move us toward, and that's what we're after. So, an instrumental good, what's worth pursuing or having for its own sake, and not just for its effects, would be instrumentally valuable. Intrinsically valuable, not instrumentally. All right, so our first theory that states what something that's intrinsically valuable would be hedonism. And so, what is it that is intrinsically good according to hedonism? Well, it comes from the very name itself, hedone, which means in Greek, pleasure. So, pleasure is the only thing that is intrinsically good for people according to hedonism. Now, I want to go ahead and make a point here that when we talk about pleasure, we're talking about something broader than the sort of immediate sensual pleasures, like from eating chocolate. Okay, so I could say that the pleasure that comes from eating chocolate is what I'm going to commit my life to. No, it's not. That's not sufficient. Now, that may be a good, but that kind of pleasure is a very limited form of what we're talking about. Pleasure encompasses other kinds of goods. Other kinds of experiences that, if you think about it in terms of enjoyment, which we're going to do in just a bit, so the pleasures that are enjoyable, which some are very, very fleeting, they may be good, but they're very fleeting, they don't last very long. Others will be very, very lasting, and they tend to be the things that require more work or effort from us to develop, like, say, friendship. the pleasures of enjoying good friends. Well, it takes time to develop that kind of friendship, right? So when we talk about pleasure, then we need to think broader than just the sort of sensual pleasures. And so that's the first sort of hurdle to get over when you hear hedonism as a theory about what is intrinsically good and valuable for us, is to not think of it as limited to just sensual pleasures. Okay, that's a sensualist who pursues that. A hedonist is somebody who pursues pleasure because of the additional kinds of enjoyments, some of which are very deep and meaningful, that one attains through doing that. Okay, so anyway, backing up then, pleasure is the only thing that is intrinsically good for us, and pain then would be the only thing that is intrinsically bad for us. Okay, so there is the definitions of hedonism. So let's talk then about some of these distinctions that I was just mentioning about sort of degrees of pleasure or even types of pleasure. And so in your text, he just divides it into two types. One is physical pleasures, which would be those sensual pleasures, like in the examples here, tasting an apple, if you like apples. Substitute your own food there for whatever is pleasurable to taste. And then sitting in a hot tub for some people would be a very pleasant physical experience, sensation. Okay, so those are physical pleasures. And the second type of pleasure would be attitudinal pleasures. It's kind of a strange word to use there, but this is where the concept of enjoyment comes to be important, because then we're talking about this attitude, enjoyment as this attitude, a positive attitude, in fact. So you think about the pleasure of winning a big game. There isn't that sort of immediate sensual pleasure like from sight or sound or taste, although those things could be going on too. That has to do more with an experience that occurs, a pleasurable experience that occurs inwardly more than through like the skin or through the senses, or maybe the effects that a beautiful work of art has on you, and so you want to surround yourself with beautiful works of art. Those are the kinds of attitudinal pleasures that would be more durable than the kinds that come through the physical. Okay, so there is the distinction that your author makes, and this, let me see, on page 30, I should have tagged that so I'm not wasting video time. But if you look at the two claims here, let's just go ahead and cement this so that it's clear. There's a claim that's made on page 30 called Claim T. So this says, if someone knows you very well, loves you, and for your own sake wants you to have X, then X makes you better off. Okay, so if you think about parents and children, parents know their children really well. Parents love their children. And for their sake, they want them to be happy. Okay, that is the effect that they want. So this shows that happiness makes you better off. But the problem there is that we can be mistaken about what will increase our welfare, what will increase our happiness. And so the well-meaning parent may end up spoiling their child, and then this could lead to things that make them very unhappy, ultimately. So there may be sort of short-term satisfactions and pleasure if you implement this point T, but then in the longer term, you aren't developing the attitudinal pleasures. Okay, so let's look at then claim H. Author claims then that what we are mistaken about sometimes, maybe often, is when we act in such a way that is for their own good, thinking we know what's going to make them happy. And that's where the test fails for hedonism, if that's hedonism. But instead, hedonism says this: if something makes you happier, then it promotes your well-being. And if something fails to make you happier, then it fails to promote your well-being. That's hedonism. Okay? So don't think of the hedonist as somebody who is constantly after self-gratification, or when in relationship to others, always looking to spoil the other person, to get some sort of satisfaction out of that themselves, or even thinking that it's for their own good that I'm, giving them the latest Xbox or whatever it is. Okay, so you get the difference there between a mistaken idea of hedonism, which is claim T, and what the hedonists would actually claim, which is claim H. So do have a look at those two on page 30 and review those. And the key idea that's introduced there in claim H then is then the connection between whatever it is that makes you happy increases your enjoyment, increases your pleasure. Whatever fails to make you happy, then it is not promoting your well-being, it's not promoting your enjoyment. Okay, so let's move on. See if I did that. So that I guess we can go ahead and sum this up by asking the question, which type of pleasure, physical or attitudinal, do hedonists think has intrinsic value? I think I've already given this one away. It's the attitudinal pleasures, right? Because these are the ones that that make you happy and that promote your sense of well-being. And then what fails to make you happy and then what does not promote your well-being. Okay, so then your author discusses the attractions of hedonism, and these are listed for you. Let me see here. It's fairly straightforward, not something that is going to be difficult to you don't have to persuade a lot of people that hedonism is attractive. So there's not anything actually by way of argument here to suggest that hedonism needs to convince you of something. So it's just a couple of claims really. So number one claim is there are many kinds of good life, and so this helps us explain, for example, why there's lots of different ways or models for what makes a good life. If you have an artistic bent, it might be in producing art or being in the company of artists, things like that. But you're not saying that art is the only way to be happy for everyone. All right, so it allows that there can be lots of different forms of the good life. And that what makes one individual happy is not necessarily going to be the same thing that makes another individual happy. And so the second point then is that it is one's personal authority and well-being that go hand in hand. And this is back to claim H that I mentioned on page 30, that what makes you happy is ultimately up to you. All right? You are determining what is for your own good. And so you are responsible then, obviously, for that. So it is your authority and your authority alone that determines what well-being is for you. Okay, number 3, a third attraction is that it is, just as I mentioned to introduce this couple slides here, is that it's just intuitively plausible. Happiness clearly is better than misery. And so if we can increase and accumulate happiness, then that's going to improve our life. Our life will go better. If, however, misery is part of that, then that's the part of our lives that's bad. And you can think of many different forms that misery might take. Maybe being alone would be one of those. Maybe enduring pain, like physical pain, would be another one of those. Like going through bad health or something like that. We aren't obviously improved by going through. Our lives aren't necessarily better by going through things that are miserable. But we do know that our lives seem to go better as long if happiness is accumulating, is certainly more present than misery. That's the intuitive. So intuitive there means just on the face of it, doesn't require argument. It just seems convincing without further discussion. All right, and then the next attraction would be, look, we finally get an answer to the explanations of why we should do some things and not do other things. All right, so rather than have like a bunch of list of rules or something that we have to share or be convinced of or agree to, instead what we do is we can just simply go to the end of the explanation, which is, for the example here, is why exercise? Why do that? I mean, there's misery involved there, right? Well, we do it because of some other benefit. It's an instrumental good. To be healthy. But then why be healthy? Well, there again, it's an instrumental good because I want to be happy. And the healthier I am, the happier I am. But then why be happy? Okay, so right there is the end of the explanation. There is no further explanation needed when you get to that question. Why be happy? The explanation stops. It comes to an end. And so that is attractive about hedonism, is that it has this stopping point. If you can show, how activity A leads you eventually to the end of that explanation, that, this makes me happy, then you have provided all the rational understanding of that activity that you need. Okay, got a couple more. So number 5 is that hedonists can justify the rules of the good life, as well as their exceptions. So they do not suggest that any rule governing your behavior, your conduct, is ever going to be absolute. That is, it must be followed without exception. They're going to give you, or could give you, lots of good suggestions, rules for good life, like making good friends, like seeking an interesting job and staying in it, those kinds of things. But it also can tell you some exceptions to things. And the one that your author goes into just a little bit is the masochist, someone for whom pain is not directly connected to misery at all, but actually comes with some pleasure. And so the hedonist then can explain why in this unusual case, the masochist, for them, pain is something that promotes their well-being, not something that hinders their well-being. Okay? So the rule for them is, well, you are pursuing what is good for you. Okay? So even the unusual cases, hedonism can then give an explanation for the rules that they follow. All right, and then the last one is that happiness is not something that we just want for ourselves, but also for our loved ones. And we talked about that in just a moment ago in looking at claim T, which was this idea, we want our children, for example, to be better off. We want them to be to experience well-being and flourish. And so why? Well, because we know them well, we love them, and for their own sake, we want them to be happy. And so we have this idea, well, if I give them X, or if I do X for them, that's going to make them happy. So we saw how that particular model does not fit well in hedonism, because the other person doesn't necessarily know what is going to be good for, or is going to make or bring happiness to the other person. Instead, though, what we would say is we look at the other consideration, which is that we will want to have the other person, the child, for example, learn what it is that promotes their own well-being, that makes them happy, and to be aware of what fails to make them happy, and then to pursue the thing that makes them happy. That's what we'd encourage them to do. We wouldn't do it for them, in other words. Okay. So then, one problem that comes up, though, in this particular thing, in this particular attraction, is this worry that, well, wait a minute, if the greatest amount of happiness for a loved one could be achieved by lobotomizing them, taking away their ability to reason, for example, and that would increase their happiness, relatively speaking. Is that I'm sorry, is that going to make them happy, relatively speaking? Would you want them to be lobotomized if it could be shown to you, oh, that's going to make them happy? You know, it seems that the hedonist would say, well, you would want that for your loved one. Okay, not that you would actually implement it, obviously, but that the hedonist would have a difficult time explaining why, you know, they would not want to see their loved one lobotomized if it could be shown that that was the very thing that they perhaps desired in order to maximize their happiness, in order to promote their own sense of well-being, that they were convinced. You know, our loved one was convinced that that's what I need. I need this procedure. Would you want that for them? You know, it doesn't seem obvious that we would want that for them. And that problem then is something that is suggests that maybe hedonism, as true and accurate as it might be in a lot of situations, maybe it isn't adequate as a value theory, comprehensive value theory. So that's what we're going to do next in Chapter 2, is look at the question, if happiness is happiness, then all that matters. Maybe there's more that matters. So we're going to look at some of the arguments then against hedonism, and I'll catch you then on the next video to do that. Take care and see you in Chapter 2.